Welcome to America's Premier Experts. I'm your host, Jess Todtfeld. Jim Murphy is a personal injury attorney, and he's somebody who has been doing this for 20 years and doing something a little bit different. Thanks again for coming here.
Almost 20 years, and thanks. But, you know, over the years I've done this stuff, I tell you, I've seen the same problems over and over again. Person's in a terrible wreck. They rush to the hospital. They find out they've got serious internal injuries. The doctors are saying, look, we got to keep you overnight. Sometimes it turns into a week hospital stay. They get out of the hospital and they're out of work, sometimes weeks, sometimes months. Yeah. Then beyond that, they've got rehab and other medical expenses that follow. So some folks who've just been living their lives in a normal fashion are beset by a tragedy. So when I've seen these problems happen, what we do is we look at the other driver, the other person that's caused a serious accident. Well, in Georgia, the minimum policy that a person has to have car insurance is $25,000. Now,
that's the minimum.
That's right.
They just get by.
That's right. So certainly in the kind of accident that I've described with the medical bills and lost wages that person's had, it's going to far exceed $25,000.
Right.
So what are people to do? Well, most people aren't aware of the importance of good uninsured motorist coverage. And by having good coverage, good limits that is, you can deal with the consequences of a tragedy like that. We always recommend that you should have at least $1 million in uninsured motorist coverage.
$1 million?
Absolutely. And it's interesting that, you know, if you go to look and increase your limits, the cost for increasing that insurance is not that high.
And that's the next question that people are having. Oh, this sounds like it's really expensive, and this is what you're advocating, because you're looking at the root of a lot of these problems, not just when people show up and you end up working with them.
Exactly. And interestingly enough, a few years ago, when I increased my limits, I found out that it was only a few $100s actually more per year
for the whole year.
That's right, to get up to $1 million in coverage. So this is insurance that people have got to maintain. And I've actually just written a book
yes.
that describes how to buy car insurance in Georgia. And I cite several examples in the book about disastrous events that people have had and have had to either file bankruptcy, have gotten into some terrible financial situations. But if they had good uninsured motorist coverage, they wouldn't have suffered so severely.
And that's my question for you. What is the cost of not making an insurance change?
Well, the cost is financial disaster. I mean, let's face it, you know, we all know what hospital bills and doctor bills are looking like, especially, you know, when you go to the emergency room. And then when you're out of work for any considerable period of time, if you've got a family you're taking care of, what does it mean when you're without a paycheck for weeks or months on end as a result of being in a car wreck? So I try to emphasize to folks the importance of good uninsured motorist coverage. I ask people to go to my website and download my free booklet and read it and try to understand the importance of uninsured motorist coverage.
And you have some free information on the actual mistakes that people make and how to avoid them. By the way, what is the website?
The website is murphylawyer.com.
Okay.
And I'm glad you brought that up. Another common thing that people experience when they're in a wreck. Well, have you ever been in a wreck?
Thankfully, I have only little ones, but I have not been in a big, huge wreck. Does it count? I don't know if they anything.
Good for you that you haven't.
Yeah.
But if you talk to anybody that's been in a serious car accident, they're just stunned. They're in a daze. They don't know what's happened to them. And what happens is that they're not capable of making good decisions, right? So they make sometimes bad decisions that can affect the outcome of their case. What I have done to try to alleviate some of the problem for people is develop a booklet that describes specifically what you should do if you're in a car wreck. It's titled 5 Mistakes to Avoid If You're in a Car Wreck.
Right.
But I go into certain detail about, for instance, making sure you call the police, making sure they do a report, talk to witnesses, make sure that there are witnesses that have seen what have happened if possible. Take good pictures of the cars,
right.
of both cars, yours and the one that hit you, if you can. And I offer this book free, and it can be downloaded from my website.
Great.
Absolutely. Again, it's at the website murphylawyer.com. If any listeners out there are interested in downloading it, you can come to the website, take this important information, stick it in your glove compartment, and therefore, if you're in a terrible wreck, you'll be able to go to something and say, hey, listen, I got to do this, this, and this, so I know what I'm doing here and not making any kind of disastrous mistake.
And Jim, I have to ask you, I know you've been practicing in Atlanta for a long time. You're I'm sure doing very comfortably. You don't have to do this. You don't have to go out there helping people. You could just live a very quiet life, work with clients, and go away, do your thing. But what motivated you to say, no, I'm going to come up with these booklets, they're going to be free. I'm going to put them on the website. I'm going to reach out. I'm going to tell people the right things to do. Why?
Well, Jesse, I've seen some terrible situations. For even a close friend of mine recently was in a terrible car wreck and suffered the kind of losses that I described earlier. And of course, we don't want to mention names, but I just felt in my heart that, listen, the public needs to know about uninsured motorist coverage. They need to know that if they're in a wreck, they don't have to file bankruptcy. They don't have to lose everything. The insurance is out there, and if you understand how insurance works and you buy it in an effective way, in a cost-effective way, you can protect yourself. And that's the message I want to get out there. I think that people that have good insurance coverage, they have better cases, and they can better have an overall better result in their claim. You know, all too often people think, hey, I'm going to get a big settlement because I got this great lawyer. But a lot of times that's not the case. It often comes down to what kind of insurance coverage you've got.
Right. And I guess probably waiting until they have the big wreck or accident or somebody they know to go get the information, probably a little bit later. Maybe they should just go get it now, learn, know. Unfortunately, if it's not us, it's going to be somebody that we know.
That's right. That's right. And you know, these things happen to the people that we know all the time, and it just becomes such a tragic situation.
What kind of ripple effect have you noticed that obviously brought you to where you are right now, to trying to help people? What have you noticed? I noticed you mentioned bankruptcy. That would be an awful, terrible, worst-case scenario. What else? Well,
I tell you, you're talking about changing times and what's been happening lately, and you know, it's amazing that I'm hearing figures like maybe 10 to 20% of the drivers out there don't have insurance. They're driving without insurance. So it gets back to the principle.
What percentage?
10 to 20%.
To 20%.
If you can believe that. It's in that range, depending on what part of the country you're living in. So, again, it gets back to the point that I mentioned earlier. How do you protect yourself from potentially disastrous consequences when someone hits you and they don't have insurance?
Right.
You got to have good uninsured motorist coverage.
And you're giving away free information. It's where, again? Make sure everybody knows.
Thanks. Yes, it's on my website, www.murphylawyer.com.
Jim Murphy, one of the best lawyers in all of Georgia. Thank you very much for being here today.